As well as brand, Patrick Mcgoohan, still under the banner of Everyman Films Limited, considered making a wide variety of projects. Through our research, 3 unique scripts have come into our possession, all of which would have been made in their own individual styles. The first of these scripts, entitled BLACKJACK, is an extended story treatment for a feature film from a book by Leon Garfield, and portrays a bleak vision of London in 1749. The plot follows the fortunes of 3 very contrasting characters: Blackjack himself, a hardened criminal described as 7 feet tall and as wide as a house; Bartholomew Dorking, an 18-year-old boy who inadvertently saves Blackjack's life; and Belle Carter, a girl the unlikely pair rescue from the clutches of a doctor whilst he is taking her to a London mental asylum.
The idea of Blackjack was of innocence and ignorance, and I was fascinated with the idea of somebody at the age of, say, 14 or 15 who'd stopped developing at the age of 4, but physically had developed, so that a 14-year-old with the tantrums of a 4-year-old was terrifying. In the same way with Blackjack himself, this huge monster who is physically terrifying.
The story opens with a highly dramatic hanging of Blackjack. He's been on the run from the police, and we see him captured in the first scene. As several constables overpower their enormous quarry, we glimpse a silver tube in Blackjack's hand. It is 4 inches long and ½ an inch in diameter. His crimes are such that he is immediately taken to be hanged, where Mrs. Gorgandy, a professional widow, claims Blackjack's body so she can sell his remains to a local surgeon for use in anatomical experiments. The sheer weight of his corpse is such that it requires several men, including the unwilling Bartholomew, to lift Blackjack onto Mrs. Gorgandy's cart. Once back at her house, Bartholomew rapidly finds himself alone with a monstrous cadaver, only to realize that Blackjack is not dead yet. He gestures towards his mouth, from where he wants the boy to remove the now dented silver tube, which has prevented his windpipe from being crushed.
The silver tube that he puts in his throat to stop himself being hanged was something I learnt about in reading the Newgate calendar. That it was something that was known about and was practiced. How often it worked, I don't know, but it obviously did work occasionally, a 4-inch tube, because hanging in those days was a matter of strangulation, wasn't breaking the neck. They'd be on a cart that would be driven away and they'd be left suspended. So anything that would keep an airway open would keep them alive.
Having helped Blackjack, Bartholomew reluctantly finds himself on the run along with the giant criminal. Only a short distance into their journey, the pair hazard upon a crashed stagecoach, which is transporting Belle Carter to the London mental asylum. In the confusion, she has escaped, and Bartholomew is offered £10 by Dr. Jones for her recapture. He soon finds her, only to fall almost immediately in love, despite her uncontrollable rages. Before their friendship can develop, they are separated by Dr. Jones, who has traced them to the travelling circus, with which they have since become associated. Bartholomew, with Blackjack's help, sets out to free Belle once and for all. This rescue is set against the dramatic backdrop of an earthquake that hits London, convincing its frightened inhabitants of the impending end of the world.
There was an earthquake in London in April 1750. There were 2 earthquake shocks, I think 28 days apart, and a 3rd shock was confidently predicted that would be the end of the world, when it didn't happen. And apparently there was a mass exodus from London waiting for the 3rd shock. There's wonderful descriptions by Horace Walpole of it, and of various duchesses who went out of London to play brag while their husbands were left in London to be killed. It was an extraordinary time of preaching and madness, and somehow it did seem to fit with the general theme of ignorance ignorance and innocence, and the effect almost of a nursery rhyme.
So, how far did Patrick Mcgoohan and Everyman Films Limited take the project?
From what I remember, I think I wrote it in 1967. Fairly shortly afterwards, I remember being immensely pleased and excited to hear that Patrick Mcgoohan was interested in it, and Terence Freely to do a script. And then I heard, as so often one does in the film business, nothing more about it. I don't know what happened. I had no idea that a full script had been prepared. I'd love to have seen it at the time, because I would have been closer to it then than now. Well, like any writer, I was very pleased and very flattered to see how closely it kept to my novel, and kept in what for me were vital parts of the story, which the film that was eventually made by Ken Loach had to drop for very practical reasons. That the story, when it was eventually made, was shifted up to York instead of London. And unfortunately there wasn't an earthquake in York. So all the earthquake part had to be dropped, so the effect of the end of the world and the impending cataclysm and the eventual miracle that came out of it, that I felt was the most miraculous thing of all, the fact that nothing happened. The fact that had everything dissolved, had everything been disastrous, that in a way was almost expected. But the very fact that nothing happened seemed to be more miraculous, that the world went on.
But if it had been produced by Everyman Films back in 1968, would Patrick Mcgoohan and David Tomlin have handled it better than Ken Loach?
Yes, I think he would, because the work that I've seen of it, that I know of his, of the amazingly imaginative The Prisoner, I think he would have taken it not as a historical document, which it isn't, but as a work of imagination, of fantasy, and dealt with it in that way, with larger-than-life characters and almost German expressionism in the filming, which is what I'd hoped. Not realism, but expressionism, where everything, the weather and everything is important, the look of a house is important, which I feel that television can do and very rarely does, but Patrick Mcgoohan certainly did it in The Prisoner.